time that you want to subscribe to that discipline and the training and the preparation and being aligned, the mission alignment of you and your team, is because then you have this extraordinary ability to adapt and to be flexible when the time and the moment requires that, and when you need to immediately, jump outside of yourself and, at a moment's notice, be creative and be innovative and come up with solutions where you felt like there was an insurmountable problem.
San Diego 911 emergency. You need to come right away. There's a man with a gun and it's loaded. Receiving emergency signal from 4 George 1141. We've got a white female down. We need paramedics code for. All available units roll code that way.
Welcome to the podcast. In this first segment for today, we're talking about training, and I have an amazing lady here with us, and I mean lady with a capital L, Sarah Apgar. She's the founder of firefighter, which is a strength solution for everyone ages 8 to 80. She originally designed her signature training tool, the Steel Hose, which was featured in 2020 on ABC's Shark Tank. So if she looks familiar, that's why you've seen her on TV. And she designed it to train firefighters better for the rigors of the job. And I have not just one, but I have, this thing's heavy. I have two of them here that we're going to be talking about her invention and all sorts of things entrepreneurial and training related. Let me tell you a little bit about Sarah. She is an Iraq War veteran, an all-American collegiate athlete. She's a fitness pro. She's a former firefighter. She's a current mom of 2 little girls. And in addition to her Shark Tank debut, Sarah and firefighter have been featured in Rolling Stone magazine, Men's Health, Muscle and Fitness, ABC News, Oxygen magazine, and performed for clients the likes of ESPN, FDNY, and the United States military. Right now, Sarah's living in Port Washington, New York with her husband, Ben Smith, who is a plastic and reconstructive surgeon. And she has her 2 young daughters, Emery and Arlen, and a puppy named Louisiana, which I think is a cool name for a dog, just like a classic military, name it after a state or a city, right? So Sarah, welcome. I'm so honored to have you here.
Thank you so much. Likewise.
So Sarah, on this segment on training, you being in the military, being a first responder with the fire department, and as a personal trainer in the fitness world, tell me about your invention, this Steel Hose. Tell me how it came about. What prompted this, and what are the benefits of it?
So the beautiful thing about the Steel Hose is that all we were doing when this vision first came to me was solving simple problems. And what that meant is, for me and my team, we were really struggling, especially as volunteer firefighters, that we're not constantly training in the skills and the requirements day in and day out all day, the way some professional units would train. We really struggled with a lot of the unique weight-loaded demands of the fireground, the high-pressure situations, the alarms in the middle of the night, and going from 0 to 60 all at once. And so I started to think about, well, what are some of the solutions that we can come up with to really train better for the unique rigors of this job, and even different from the military. Most of my military time, I was not masked under compressed air, working in environments of low visibility. There are a lot of, again, even though I'd been in physically demanding environments before, I hadn't been in ones that had these unique high pressures. And so one of the simple ways that I decided that we should start to train is using the lifeline of the fireground, which is fire hose. We always had it lying around the truck bay. We needed to constantly train with hose, and yet the number of times that we pulled fire hose off the trucks, charged it with water, felt what that charged fire hose would feel like, and then actually moved around with it the way that we needed to on the fireground when we're advancing hose line to put out fires, was very, very limited. And so the steel hose, as I started to fill it with different kinds of sands and pebbles and grits to try to mimic this feel of the charged hose, became this beautiful tool to really train grip strength, to start to help firefighters understand core stability, to understand how to move weight around, above, below, in and around the body. And all of these skills that were not really given as part of the technical skills training, but are actually the foundation for us to be successful in those movements. So I invented the first prototype of the steel hose in 2013 to solve that simple problem, start to train on some of these really simple movement techniques. And that snowballed, and we realized how many different skills and how many types of movements and applications that we could train with this, even if they weren't directly related to the hose advance.
So I don't know if you know this about me, the Tomorrow's Police Officer community has heard me talk about before, but I was also a firefighter for about 5 years in South Carolina on a volunteer fire department. And like you say, going from 0 to 60, the largest structure fire I was ever in, the dispatch pager went off at 10 minutes after 11 at night. I just remember that because I was sitting in a drive-through back when I ate junk food. I was sitting at the drive-through getting food for me and my girlfriend. And I didn't make it home. I wasn't home for about 6 hours.
Yeah.
You didn't have cell phones back then. So there was no way to, hey, by the way, you're going to go hungry. And so that whole 0 to 60. And the whole concept, and you gave us I always look for a takeaway in every segment, at least one. And I think with you, there's going to be multiple ones. You gave the takeaway already. So folks, if you back up, hit that back button a couple of times to go back to when Sarah first started talking. Because what you said was critical, which is how, and I'm going to paraphrase, how do you train for realistic conditions without being in those conditions to begin with? So you do weight training, but you're not masked up working with an air pack on your back. You're not working with a charged hose. And, I look back at the training that I received in South Carolina was really good. Yet, as we did our ladder training, we trained with hauling up equipment, pike poles, axes, breaching equipment. We would lock in on the ladder and then haul stuff up, and we practiced that back and forth. But I don't remember, but more than once or twice that we trained with charged hoses and being on the ladder. And that large structure fire that I referenced, that's the first thing that happened. We rolled up, and it was a 2-story, it was a house. They had totally violated building codes. There was 21 rooms at this house, 21. And they were all mishmashed together. They just kept on adding onto this house. And the first thing that happened was we throw a ladder up. I go up to the second floor with a charged hose. They didn't wait to charge it when I was up there. I had to carry it up charged because it was just kind of a mess that night. And so what you said is critical. And I love that you saw the need for that in training to be able to, how do we mimic these conditions so that when we're in the actual emergency, we can operate well? Kudos to you for doing that.
Thanks. Yeah, well, and that's translated to, far beyond the fire service now. When we think about actually some of the unique qualities that we realized about the steel hose when I started to have personal trainers and sport specific coaches come to, strength and conditioning coaches come into our universe and say, well, this would be terrific for training for, having for rotational movements on the lacrosse field or on, with a field hockey stick, and having athletes who can mirror, are not compensated on the left or the right because we need to mirror the strength that we have, on both sides. Even kickers, working with some of that hip mobility that we can do with the steel hose. All of these things we started to realize actually have, the same types of of requirements that we had when we were looking at firefighting skills, but, unique to, in some cases, just everyday life. I mean, shoveling snow, there's an amazing statistic that there's 11,000 injuries, hospitalized injuries a year from people shoveling snow. Obviously, 99.5% of those are entirely preventable. If we're strong in our core stability, we're able to balance, so we're not slipping, we're not throwing out our back and herniating discs. These are all, preventable musculoskeletal injuries. So when you start to look at some of the research and data and think about, the activities that we do and the way we train for them, you start to realize how much progress we can actually make in being more prepared, more ready, stronger in the unique ways that we need to be for that activity.
Yeah, and being born and raised in Michigan, I shoveled a lot of snow as a kid, as a teenager, so I get that whole injury while you're shoveling the snow. You're, if nothing else, just being sore afterwards. So
Yeah.
I love that you can take this and not, just by a steady workout program with something that's not complicated to use at all, that still has so many applications, like being out taking care of your driveway. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. One of the things that on the training end of things, let's say somebody works for a law enforcement agency or a fire academy, and they go, look, we want to, I'm running a fire academy, and I see the benefit of each recruit in the academy having their own, so they carry it around, so they get used to the weight and the feel of it, and they have a piece of gear they're responsible for, and they work out with it. And times of COVID, they don't have to keep cleaning it, even though you can clean this. They don't have to, because it's theirs. How do they learn to use it? Because I wouldn't have thought of what motions can I make to help me get not injured shoveling snow. So how can they learn about the different exercises? And you have a bunch of them. I mean, you have a boatload of them. They're awesome. How do they get that information?
Yeah, so for starters, we like to have everybody start by just even accessing us on our website. When you go to our pro page, our FitFighter Pro page on our website, we've got a great starter video before your steel hose even arrives, this 27-minute video that gives you soup to nuts, the anatomy of the steel hose, what's really unique about its structure, the different grips you can use, the ways that you layer it on the body, and gives you just a taste of some of the different routines, flow movements, and all the 7 basic fundamental strength movements. So that's the place to start, like right now, before you even have your steel hose, so much great education about why we're addressing the fundamentals of strength. And then following on from that, once you're totally sold, and this is, you sort of realize that FitFighter is something that can be a part of anyone's life, then we actually have an entire library online at classes.fitfighter.com, where we have put together strength, power, conditioning, mobility, full body combination workouts ranging from 10 to 40 minutes. And these are all workouts that are going to address, those unique parts of your training. So, our pros will recommend that you do 1 or 2 strength workouts, 1 or 2 conditioning workouts, and then a couple of combination workouts. And we have just thousands of movements, hundreds of workouts on this platform that we've compiled over the past year. So it's a really robust library that I'm really proud at, very low cost, and with just the best, world-class pros that we brought to the table, that we can provide training, give you a great strength tool and solution, and then teach you how to use it.
That's awesome, because, I teach a lot of subjects, but I don't teach physical conditioning. And so you wouldn't want me teaching somebody how to use this. And that happens a lot in smaller agencies. I don't, whether it's a volunteer fire department or a small police department, a small EMS agency, a lot of times they don't have a lot of training dollars and so it falls on the in-house people to kind of figure it out. You've got pros. You have professional trainers that they can access anywhere 24 hours a day to be able to show them how to use this, right?
Yes, absolutely. 24/7. We've got this platform. You sign in, it'll help you to pick your favorites, have those up top. And also, great for if you actually work with, if you do have, one of the things I think about for the academies and police units, fire service, is that often these tactical environments do have, whether it's line officers or peer fitness instructors, or just even champions who really are helping the team along with strength and conditioning. This is great because we can help them to develop, again, those strength fundamentals. They're going to have a movement library of 150 movements at their disposal. They can also use that resource to create their own training programs if they do have some baseline level of strength and conditioning or a fitness certification. So that's something we find our academies do a lot, is they'll have a few accounts with us where then that's a resource and they can help to train the rest of the team if that's something they want to do more at like a unit level.
That's very cool. And the last thing before we close up this block is, so our gym is Fitness Quest 10, and these hoses have been personalized to Fitness Quest. So Fitness Quest was good enough to let me borrow this for a short period of time, so I could show our viewers, the folks. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, I'm holding up a steel hose right now, but it has the Fitness Quest 10 on it. Like, it's not going to rub off. This is high quality stuff. So you're able to personalize it as well, correct?
Yeah, if we have a high enough volume with an academy or a police unit, we're able to customize or personalize using unit logos, which is kind of fun. It gives you a little sense of ownership there over the hoses. And so, yeah, that's something that's been really fun for the tactical units and the gyms and training centers.
That's cool. That's very cool. Well, listen, as we wrap up this block on training, I want to step back to that takeaway that we identified early on, which is the ability to mimic real life conditions in training where it's safe, and yet you can get used to performing certain tasks. When you're in the executive state of mind, I'm adding in here a little bit, when you're in the executive state of mind, when your prefrontal cortex is wrapped in, where you're productive and you're creative and you're really learning and setting into memory good training habits. That way, when you're in the survival state and you're performing and you're falling back on your training, you're going to just perform flawlessly because your mind and your body are used to doing these things under those emergency conditions. Sarah, thank you for that takeaway. We appreciate it. And as we wrap up training, is there anything that you'd like to add?
No, I would say that I would return to where I started, which is that, solve the simple problems that are 10 feet in front of us. And it's a great way then to, figure out how to move forward from there. And, doesn't have to always be complexity that creates the most impactful solutions.
Yeah. Brilliant advice. Brilliant advice. Sarah, in this segment, we're going to be talking about leadership. And I tell you what, someone who takes a need like you did, which was for training for under realistic conditions when you weren't having to be in those conditions. And you gave the example of I'm going to paraphrase here, hauling a charged hose around the fire ground while you're masked up, wearing an air tank on your back with all the extra gear. And how do you simulate that? How do you get ready for those emergency conditions? You took a problem and you came up with a great solution that ends up benefiting a lot of people. So kudos to you for doing that. And you truly were a leader in your field in how, I call it leader without a title. You don't have to be a chief officer or a captain or an engineer to create and solve a problem. You can be a line level firefighter, line level patrol officer, a line level jail deputy, private in the military, or a seaman recruit, and be solving these problems. So kudos to you for stepping up and taking the leadership to do that. With that kind of framework, what do you see as you grow your business? The transferable skills is a big topic for me. What transferable skills can you look back and say, as an Iraq War veteran, as a volunteer firefighter, as a mom, how these leadership skills that you learn in these different roles now as an entrepreneur, how do they fit in?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that a lot of people associate the military and the fire service and some of the tactical professional environments I've been in as ones where there's not a degree of flexibility or adaptability or creativity, and think of it more as sort of a rote environment where it's very prescriptive and highly disciplined. And those things are true, and I liked those qualities of those professional environments. But also, what those environments teach you is that the reason that you want to subscribe to that discipline and the training and the preparation and being aligned, the mission alignment of you and your team, is because then you have this extraordinary ability to adapt and to be flexible when the time and the moment requires that, and when you need to immediately jump outside of yourself and at a moment's notice be creative and be innovative and come up with solutions where you felt like there was an insurmountable problem. And so I think that type of those skills, I think of of both of those things, of creating just the right amount of structure for yourself, but then you're able to leverage your strengths and to be adaptable and flexible when the time requires it, which is ultimately going to make us successful in solving problems and getting any kind of challenge to the finish line is I think probably the number one thing that I always think about. And that also is revealing in terms of why people often say to me, you seem so happy and not a personality I expect in the military. And I think to myself, that's so interesting because I never thought about it that way. I've always thought about it as like, wow, what a beautiful environment where there's a baseline of structure and discipline, and then that then enables and allows us to leverage the strengths of the team. So that's number one. And then I think number two is the expectations setting, which I think is foundational for any successful team to operate. So I always noticed in the corporate environment that we do this, we're much worse at setting expectations for each other and then having a clarity around those expectations, then revisiting them if there's a problem or we have a challenge, with in our chain of command or on our team. And in the military, you're always constantly setting expectations right up front. And then if those expectations aren't met, that's a conversation that is had immediately, so that you can reset and figure out, what the stem or the root of that issue was. And it allows for, again, this just a clarity that I think can get very, very muddy and buried and becomes kind of this, this sort of like flame that kind of festers, for people in other settings. So I think that's a skill that's very highly transferable from, throughout professional environments. And then just to being a mom and being able to keep her calm and being able to sort of manage through, those tantrums and those challenging situations. I'd say those are the top two when it comes to leadership that right away in the military that I was grateful to learn, and I think have been constant threads throughout my professional career.
Yeah, and both of those are amazing points. They're so on target. I want to take that expectations thing, because I've said for almost my entire military and law enforcement career, people will rise to the level that you set the bar at. And if that bar is set low, they'll rise to that level or drop down to that level. They're going to come. You set the bar high, and it's amazing that poor performers who, they were down here, you set that bar high, you raise that bar, all of a sudden they're coming up to it when you let them know that the bar has been raised or where the bar is set at. I mean, the sports analogy that I've used too is when a pole vaulter. If a pole vaulter did not know, if they were coming around a corner blind and finding out at the last second or after they launched up, oh, that bar set at 12 feet, instead of 17, it changes completely their approach. And if they don't know it's set at 17, they think it's at 12, they're going to miss it. And the coach is going to yell at them, oh, why didn't you get over that bar? You didn't know it set at 17 feet. And it's human nature. So did you see that in the military, in the fire service, and even with your kids?
Yeah, I love the notion that one of the things I often say that feels really related to that point is that we have no idea, the large majority of us have no idea where our limits and our boundaries really are, because we've never even come close to achieving them. And I do believe that. I do think that when we talk about from a physical standpoint, from a mental and a sort of grit standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, a team standpoint, I think there's so many ways in which we don't push the envelope, because we have become accustomed to comforts that I think that make us, when we're cozy and comfy and happy, we're not always, I think, forced to kind of step out of those boundaries. And some people are. Some people are naturally inclined. They wake up in the morning and their day is going to be just like filled with challenge, and they have this sort of internal pilot light that's constantly burning and and growing. But I think and that's not. I don't think the fault of any one person. I think this is just sort of the way that we've evolved and adapted, and the way that we sort of carved out our lifestyles. And so I think that I totally agree with you. I think that people have no idea. People rise to expectations. And if you've ever been, one of the things I think about in terms of really being confident about that is experiences I've had as in the military or as a triathlete, where I really was like physically like at the end of my rope, like thought I was just going to like pass out and like never wake up, and when you've been like pushed to those extremes, then you realize you did push a limit and you pushed past it and you survived. And then you have this beautiful feeling. Actually, I'm like getting goosebumps while I talk about it, because it's so vivid, in my mind. And so I think about so vivid in the military, some of my training where, you'd be on your like 36th hour without sleep, and you're sort of borderline, hallucinating, and it's raining and you're wet and you're supposed to sleep on a concrete floor. And you sort of think to yourself, like, I'm going to die before I ever get through this night. Like, and then you survive it. So even from this like very sort of baseline physical standpoint, you realize that your body's capable of extraordinary things. The second thing I think about is when I did my most recent half Ironman, and I remember thinking to myself, the first time I had done a half Ironman, I don't think of myself as a long endurance athlete, but I do enjoy, just about any athletic challenge. And I remember thinking something like mile 35 of this bike ride along the Texas, out down in Austin, Texas, as flat as a pancake on asphalt, mile 35, I'm like out of water, still got 21 miles to go. And I remember thinking that same thing, like, man, I'm just toast. Like, I don't know if I'm going to make it. Like, I don't know if I'm just going to flat out, my legs are going to stop moving. And then you just, somehow like you sort of push through, you dig to that deeper level. And I think that those raw physical, mental, experiences that we have in certain professional environments and athletic environments really can translate to things that are less physical, right? Times when you feel mentally like you're sort of done, you're finished, or you've been just challenged to the brim, or you're scared or filled with fear, and are you ever going to get past that and some of these feelings of like deep despair? And so I think that that's right. I think that we should create, especially in professional environments where there's really high stakes. I think that creating experiences where we can be challenged in ways that push our envelopes is extremely important. And it's up to the leader to do that and ask that of people. And sometimes you might push them over the edge, and it's not always 100% successful, of course, people end up getting broken down. But I think that's really important. And so I love that point that you raised.
Thank you. And as we close up this block on leadership, I'm reminded, and I cannot think of his name, and I'll put it in the show notes because he's an amazing guy. He's a former Navy SEAL. And one of the things that he points out is when you're done, when you think you've got nothing left, you've got 40% more. You've got 40% more. And you're capable of far more. I mean, look at the stories, the rescue stories of the mom lifting the minivan off the kid. Stuff like that. You've got 40% more than you even, and maybe even more, but you had a bare minimum, you got 40% more. And I bring this out because as a leader, you need to be able to inspire people to tap into that 40%. When they think they're done, being able to get them over that hump into that extra 40%, because that is your job as a leader. And you're never going to be able to get that performance out of people, that extra bit that, for a cop who's injured, who's going to go, I'm, developing that will to live. I am not going to die here in this alley killed by some parolee. I will not have this happen. That's tapping into that extra 40%. Yeah. You're never going to be able to get there by berating people and belittling them and micromanaging them. Leading them, you will. So great takeaways for this section, Sarah. Thank you so much for your take on leadership, because you truly are a leader in so many different ways. And I want to thank you for being here. Today, we are here with an amazing lady, Sarah Apgar from FitFighter, and the website is fitfighter.com. She's an inventor of this amazing product, a steel hose, and it's, as a cop, I came on about the time that leather saps were going away. This kind of feels like a leather sap to me. I was joking with Diane that maybe we ought to carry this little 5-pound one in the car. You make a 2.5-pound one?
We don't yet, but maybe we will.
Maybe I'll put it in a special order and just
I'll be happy to oblige.
Awesome. So, but seriously, as we dive into communication, as we dive into this topic, when you think about your experience in the military, when you think about being a first responder on the fire department, as you think about being a mom and a wife, and your husband, he's a plastic and reconstructive surgeon. So I know that Ben is got to be in great demand. And so you're balancing a business life, you're balancing the mom life, you're balancing the marriage, all these moving parts. What do you use in the area of communication that other people can learn from?
It's so, I never realized how much I was going to benefit from what I try to impart on my daughters. And what I mean by that is that I'm constantly saying things to them that I find myself hours later turning around and thinking, at the back of my eyes, from pulling from the sort of like, front of my head, my little bank there, for some kind of difficult conversation, during the business day, or working with a team member on a challenging problem. And so, and that sort of things, I'm often talking to them about patience. I'm explaining to them what it means to be patient, and not just the definition, but what that feels like to be patient, and the tone of voice that you use with someone if you're being patient with another person, or the way that you breathe when you need to have patience with a situation or problem. And I'm literally saying things to them and thinking to myself, like, okay, remember this later in 2 hours when, kind of things are hitting the fan at work or in my entrepreneurial life. And so it's amazing to me. Same thing with, I'm sure that anyone who is in a partnership of any kind feels the same way. You find yourself realizing that really this is just the human connection, has some principles to it that are so fundamental and foundational to our success with each other, engaging with each other, working as teams. I even call my little girls, I call us like a family team. And then I think about my work team. I'm all about teams, as you know, from reading all of my, what I write and think about. And so I think that everything boils down to some basic principles around communication that are shared across every aspect of our lives.
You have a quote that I want to tap into. When you hit rock bottom, you say, congratulations, what an opportunity to move up. And I know you got that from your coach. And at the same time, you really embody that. And when you think about it, when you're hitting a hard point in life, and you know, the reality is that we've gone through the last 15 months of the pandemic, and we're just starting to see light at the end of the tunnel now with things opening up, at least out here in California. The shift, the mindset shift of, yes, opportunity to move up because we're at rock bottom here. How do you communicate that lesson to your team at work and your husband and your daughters? How does that communication of that mindset happen?
Yeah, oh man, it's so much to unpack on that one, and to verbalize it is hard. But I'll think about a couple of points that really I think are guideposts with that. So number one, I think, is the recognition of the state and the transparency around what you feel, where you are, and what that makes you feel. And that's something that, you know, with a small startup team, when we're in our challenging, you know, most challenging times, financially constrained, you know, cash flow constrained, going through a roller coaster during the pandemic, you know, pre-pandemic, one strategy, during the pandemic, having another business strategy, post-pandemic, you know, resetting again, as we continue to sort of, you know, steer the ship. And so I think about, you know, I've actually had team members ask me, you know, seek from me that transparency, and to say, like, can we sort of talk about where we are? Like, we generally know we have access to, right? The first 5 employees of a startup tend to have access to most of the company's information because they're tapping into it all the time. They're needing to run systems and operations. They have their hands in everything. And so they sort of know the practical facts, but they're like, let's, you know, can we talk about this? Can we kind of like level up? And then just, you know, that way we can then get through things together. And I think about that when I think about with my daughters too, you know, acknowledging like what they feel. Like, I understand how that makes you feel. It makes sense to me that you feel that way. And let's talk about how we could think about, you know, start thinking about something different. You know, let's talk about how we can, you know, start to turn the corner. So I think there's a really important acknowledgement and transparency around when you are hitting that state that then allows you to springboard back from it. And because your feet are planted firmly there for a moment, and then, you know, you have nowhere to go but sort of pivot. So I think that's the first principle I would think about. And then the second one is, which is related, is this idea that you have to start being able training yourself to envision a different state. So to envision where you're going before you get there. And that's like a really simple idea that has totally profound implications. And I wouldn't say that I've nailed this one on the head at all whatsoever. I'm actively working on this constantly because I want to constantly be envisioning when FitFighter is that billion-dollar company. And I want to envision what that is like to be the leader, what that feels like to be the leader of that company, how I make decisions, how I feel when I wake up in the morning, you know, versus trudging through the mud as an early stage startup that's, you know, had to pivot a couple times in the early stage of the company, and we've raised funds, and, you know, we're sort of trudging through the mud and growing the company. And so I'm constantly every day working on that, like even, you know, coming on your show and sort of thinking through some of my advice for leaders. And you always are having like a bit of a checkup on your confidence because you're like, well, am I worthy to even be talking about some of these topics, right? Like, because I'm in sort of this place with my business where I'm constantly sort of questioning that, having those sort of self-doubt and questions about your confidence. And so, but then you realize, of course, there's 20 years of professional history and great learnings to share. There's massive potential and huge runway in front of us, and lots of ways in which we can get there, and, keep tacking and leaning on the team and the great advisors we have and supporters. And so there's all the reasons in the world to be 100% confident in where you're headed. But when you're not there yet, it's hard to assume that posture. And so I think that's the second big idea that again, just like permeates through all the things we do, all the relationships we have, being able to step outside of the moment and realize that any one single tiny moment is just not as consequential as we think that it is. There's no moment in time that in the end has the consequence, like the weight of consequence and the burden of consequence that we feel at that very moment. There's a bigger contextual sort of environment for like universe for every one of those moments. So those are some of the things I think about that I'm constantly working on, and I love to impart so that others can sort of wrangle with those things too, and realize that that's a worthy cause to be struggling through that.
Yeah. And I want to step back because you just offered so many golden nuggets out of that. I think one of the key takeaways for this segment is that when people are not sure of their future, of their environment, they're starting to or are fully in that survival state. And when they're shifted into that survival state, that fear has kicked in, that anxiety has kicked in, and you begin to lose your creativity, you begin to lose your problem solving ability, and you literally start to shell up in self-protection. And so I picture your employees, your team members coming to you going, hey, where we're at, how's it looking? And of course they're looking ideally for the best news possible and the reassurance. What they're looking for also is the ability to say, some of these things, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's going to happen here. We're struggling here. We're succeeding here. This is where I see us going. And what that helps them do is shift out of that survival state into the executive state, where they are able to be productive and creative and get good problem solving going, and to perform better. Communication, that honest communication, because all of us have BS meters that are really sensitive. As a mom, your BS meter is really sensitive when it comes to your girls because you're protective of them. And so to be able to communicate honestly is sometimes it's a challenge for a leader, because you want to be able to provide answers, and yet you don't always have the answers to be able to provide. And it's sometimes uncomfortable to go, I don't know about this part. But that honest, forthright communication is really, really critical for people to be able to get through things. And the last thing I want to say on this is, it has always struck me that you ever watch that show, Fear Factor?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So at the end of the show, when they had their really big challenge, and it was almost always a timed challenge, you had to do something, and it was like, hold your breath the longest underwater, or be able to perform the fastest. Almost without exception, the last person to go would win, because they knew the time they had to beat. If you're holding your breath underwater and you go first, you hold it as long as you think you can. You don't tap into that 40% that I mentioned in the leadership episode. So if you haven't listened to the leadership episode, go back and listen about the 40% thing. But when we started the pandemic, when we were 2-3 months into it, nobody knew where this was going to go. It was really fearful. Now, today, we can look back and go, okay, well, it was about 15 months. And it didn't turn out to be, for a lot of people, didn't turn out to be as bad as they thought it was going to be. For some people, it was worse than they thought it would be. But we now know pretty much what that story was. The unknown has the biggest fear coming at us. That's what totally puts us in survival state, when we don't know. So your point about communicating with your team, communicating with your daughters, communicating with your husband, it's really critical, because then people know where they stand, and they don't have as much fear, and they're able to shift into that executive state.
Yeah, it's a really interesting translation of that, what I described, into some of those more sort of the physiological, elements too, which is super interesting.
Well, I want to thank you for being with us. Thank you for talking about communication, bringing in, and the last thing I want to say before we wrap up, it's funny because you were talking about, are you the right person to talk about leadership and communication training? Do I have enough? You, to me, my point of view was, I absolutely wanted your point of view on these things. And I wanted it because I see you filling these roles in the military, in the fire department, as a mom, as an entrepreneur, as a fitness pro. I look at all of the things you've accomplished, and inherently I know that you're totally the type of person that's going to be able to give great advice, great insight, great takeaways, great golden nuggets. And what's interesting is this: you are so humble that you went through a should I do this questioning. And what I love is you had the self-esteem, which gives you the self-confidence to step up and deliver in the way I knew you totally could. And I want to thank you, because as you talked about that and you were vulnerable about how you felt about that, I believe the vast majority of people go through that same kind of thought process, especially if you're being promoted from firefighter to an engineer, or engineer to a captain. If you're becoming a new detective or a new sergeant, you go through that. Am I going to be able to fill this role? And you talked through exactly, and I think that self-communication is really important. So thanks for being vulnerable. Thanks for explaining that you went through this thought process, because there's a lot of people out there that are going to go, hey, that happens to me all the time. That's great. I'm not the only one. So thank you for that, Sarah. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it and genuinely enjoyed being with you.
Same here. So for people that are looking to pick up steel hose, which, oh man, I just love this thing. I got this one. I got this 15-pounder. It's got our gym name on it. It's been customized for our gym.
Mine here too, of course.
Awesome. And
don't leave home without it.
Right. Don't leave home without it. It's a self-protection device too. But you have all the online resources to help people go, okay, I'm not a firefighter, but I'm out there shoveling snow, and this can actually benefit. Well, I'm not shoveling snow anytime soon. It's the middle of summer, but I can keep from getting an injury when I'm shoveling snow just by using steel hose. So let our listeners know how they can keep in touch with you.
Yeah, so the best way is to kick it off at fitfighter.com, because then we can get steel hoses into homes and hands. And we can also be found, and then you'll be able to see the link to our classes page to just check it out and peruse a little bit, what we're offering. And then also, if you have social media and you love to use that and follow it, we have a lot of product education on our Instagram at FitFighter, and at FitFighter Pro is a second handle that's entirely devoted to movements and education around the fundamentals of strength training. And so that's a great one too, if you're interested in just even starting to learn from our team. And then, of course, if you're more of a Facebook person, you can find us at FitFighter Training on Facebook as well. So there's lots of, and then if you're interested in the business side, and I do actually write about leadership and communication. I have 4 articles that are posted on LinkedIn that are actually very relevant to the topics we talked about today. So if you want to find me, it's Sarah Apgar at LinkedIn. I've been including some of these great discussions that we've had in some bite-sized topics there too. So love for everybody to come follow along and reach out and ask questions and engage with me. I would love that.
Terrific. And if you're driving, don't try and write any of this stuff down. Just keep on driving, keep on trucking down the road, and all of the links to be able to get a hold of Sarah will be in the show notes. So again, Sarah, thanks for being here on the show.
Thanks.
I hope you found a lot of great value in this episode of the De-Escalation Conversations podcast. Please be sure to go to our website, theidea.world, THEIDEA.world. On that website, just click on the link that resonates with you most. If you're a K through 12 educator, if you're a firefighter, medical services, law enforcement, flight attendants, whatever industry you're in, we have specialized training for you. So check that training out, because literally it can save your life, it can save your relationship, it can save your career. So check out theidea.world. And I'll look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.